Welcome to Music Matters Podcast with Daryl Craig Harris, talking about all things music with celebrities, artists, music business insiders, and more.
Mr. Bermuda Schwartz, how are you?
Good. How are you doing, Daryl?
I'm good. I'm in sunny Las Vegas in my fake studio here.
Here in LA, I'm a little bit drunk, so things are very blurry.
That's as they should be.
Oh no, that's a Zoom setting. Never mind. No, that's so you don't see all the crap in my office here. So,
well, it's the same for me. You've been partners in crime with Yankovic for decades. And it's such an interesting story because we were talking about before we started that you guys have such a long enduring partnership. And it's a story that some people know, but a lot of people don't know. So tell me how originally, well, first let's start with how you started drumming, because that's also a cool story with Ludwig and all that.
Well, I started, there's with every answer, there's like 3 or 4 backstories that go with it. Let me explain first that we lived in Chicago. My father was in advertising in Chicago and in the 50s, late 50s. And my brother, who was 5 years older than me, my dad had done some kind of an ad with Ludwig. And for whatever reason, I never asked my dad before he passed. I never asked anybody at Ludwig, can you go back to the late 50s and see if you could find my dad? I never figured out what it was that he worked on. But instead of getting paid, he bartered a snare drum for his oldest son, for my older brother. So, Bill Ludwig Jr. happily agreed, to do that, to cough up a snare that was probably worth $60 at the time,
Yeah.
And a stand and a book and a record and a pair of sticks and some brushes and a practice pad. I mean, a whole snare drum outfit. And my dad, in turn, added to the drums, bought a bass drum and a mounted tom. There was a 3-piece kit, a hi-hat stand and all that. And my brother began taking drum lessons in Chicago. Well, we moved to Phoenix. When I was about 8 or so, I began taking accordion lessons, of all things. And my brother had switched to guitar. So there was a set of drums in the house. And I guess I must have got tired of the accordion. Thought, there's no future in that. Who's going to listen to an accordion player?
It's going to be hard to pick up chicks.
Yeah, that's never going to, So I switched to the drums. We moved the drums from his room across the hall to my room. I started taking drum lessons right after my 9th birthday. This is in Phoenix. And continued, we moved to Los Angeles when I was 11 or 12, and I was in school bands and marching bands and stuff like that. And that's the seed of how the drums came to be. And they were Ludwig drums, having come from Ludwig at the time. I got a brand new set, also Ludwig. There wasn't a proliferation of all of these incredible brands out there. There were a key 4 or 5 brands: Slingerland, Rogers, Camco, Gretsch, Ludwig. That was kind of it. And then a whole series of made in Japan brands, which were made alternately by the Pearl Corporation or Hoshino, Tama. And a whole series of just these impossible long list of names of made in Japan drums. Some of them were quite good. Hardware wasn't great, but quite good. I mean, a lot of studio 80s and 90s had kind of rediscovered those and secretly using those in the studio.
Yeah, so I'm a bass player, but I also have a drum corps background. I was in the Velvet Knights in California.
Oh, sure.
Back in the early 80s, like 80s. So I'm really familiar with the whole drum thing. And
Go VKs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
cool.
that's so we have a similar thing with that. So you're in LA. This would be like 60s, 70s. You're bouncing around, playing in bands. That must have been such an exciting time to be doing that, the club scene there, right?
Well, I got into the 70s, by the time I was old enough to get into clubs.
Right.
And actually started having bands and things like that. Club scene was great. New wave was happening at the time. Rock was just about coming up. And I was I've always been like in 2 or 3 bands at once. And I've been working with a guy named Rip Masters, who's Americana and rockabilly and country and stuff. And I've been with him since 1981.
Wow.
Second only to Al in terms of longevity.
And as we know, bands, that's unheard of for most bands to be together that long.
Yeah, well, most artists don't hang in there that long, let alone keep the same guys around them. And that is really rare. And some of the other current bands I'm in, I've been in for 12, 15, 20 years. And I occasionally sub with some other bands, stuff like that. But I mean, I've always been in multiple bands concurrent with Al, starting in late 1980 when I met Al. I've always done these other bands in whatever's happening with Al. Now, obviously, for obvious reasons, he takes precedence, and all the bands know that. On the road or something, they get plenty of notice, and they bring in a sub. and they always have me come back, which I'm very grateful for because I really enjoy working with these bands.
Yeah, that's a good sign.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not that the subs aren't any good, and it's not that they just really, I had one band say, and I'd lined them, and they said, he was all right. I said, well, what was wrong? Did he not play the right parts? Oh, no, he played the right parts. Was his timing good? Oh, he has great time. Was he a nice guy? No, he's a great guy. I said, well, what's wrong? They said, he's not you.
Yeah, and that's, you know what? And that's the
nice.
thing. Right, exactly. Because that's the thing as a musician, like you want to have your own voice. And that speaks to that where everybody, you get to a certain level, especially in Los Angeles, there's a certain level where everybody's great players. Then it just becomes whatever the vibe is. And there's so much more than just playing, as we know. So let's get to Al. So how did that, I mean, I kind of know that story, but so you guys were both sort of involved in the Dr. Demento story, who I used to listen to when I was, I guess, high school, maybe early high school.
There was we were both it's funny, we both were listening, all the cool kids or all the nerdy kids, I guess, in junior high and high school listened to Dr. Demento.
That was me.
And me too. And he and I both sort of dove in quite separately from each other, but both dove in at a specific moment in time. This was early 1973, and the doctor was running a contest. He wanted there was a song called Pico and Sepulveda, which was always the number one requested song on the show, and it just got sort of old and obvious. And so he said, you know what, we're gonna pull the song. I want you guys out there that have bands or whatever you do to record your own version of Pico and Sepulveda. We'll have a contest, and the winner gets a 78 RPM record of Felix Figueroa's Pico and Sepulveda. They get my copy of that record. And so it, again, independent of each other, Al and some of his buddies sent in a recording, but there's more to a story. But that was like his first foray into the Demento area. And then some friends of mine, and again, in school bands at that time, there were no guitars or even bass players or, they were all horn players. So these were all my buddies from the school band. And I had quite a couple of very well-known guys on there. Guy named Richard Elliott on saxophone, well-known sax player. A guy named Barry Keys on trombone, who I believe wound up in the Tonight Show band. Guy named Jeff Rona, who I was actually in a band with. Jeff played flute on this recording, but he later played keyboard. He worked with Roland, and he was on the committee that invented MIDI.
Oh, well, that's a good place to be.
Not necessarily his biggest claim to fame. I mean, he's recorded and scored a bunch of TV show stuff, and he's very well known in the business. I'm sure he doesn't touch the flute anymore, but he's very well known composer, and not in a musical related way, but another trombone player in there ended up as one of the top anesthesiologists in Los Angeles. In fact, I think he's on the board of anesthesiologists.
It's always overachieving trombone players.
Yeah. And I remember one time I said, "You're an anesthetist. Do you put people to sleep?" He says, "No, I wake them up."
Yeah, exactly.
Very, very clever.
That's the money. Anyway.
So this is the very first. So early April 1973, let's say, I think it was April, was a time we both sort of jumped in. Never heard his recording, his version of the song. None of the guys involved apparently ever kept, you'd made a cassette and then you sent it in. You didn't keep a copy. Not me. I made a recording and I sent a copy of it and I kept the master. So we both, he didn't end up sending it in. He ended up seeing Dr. Demento talk at his high school. And he handed him the cassette. He says, "This is for the Pico and Sepulveda contest." And Dr. Demento evidently didn't have the heart to tell him that he'd missed the deadline. And the tape wound up in Demento's trunk. And then he sold the car. So that recording is literally, and I know the guys who played on it, and nobody's got a copy. It's gone forever. Except for the guy that owns that car. He may not realize what
gem he has in his trunk.
Right. Now, the recording that me and my friends sent in, we got second place in the contest. So we got played the night he announced the 10 top winners. And I didn't know beforehand. I mean, I just tuned in and heard it coming up. And it's like, oh boy, So I actually got some 45s that were signed by Dr. Demento and stuff like that. But he used our song. We did an instrumental of it. There's a vocal intro, Pico and Sepulveda, and then harmonies, Pico and Sepulveda, Pico and Sepulveda, and then this kind of bad horn marching band thing, and it just instrumental from. So he used it for the theme for his show because he could talk over it because there weren't any vocals conflicting with it.
Awesome.
So that was kind of cool. So we thought, wow, one, we came in pretty high in the contest. Two, we're getting played a lot. Let's record another song, send it in, which we did the following January 1st, 1974. We recorded the Ballad of Woodsy Owl, sent that in. He played that. We weren't and some of the same guys who had done the Pico and Sepulveda as well. And a little more time went by, middle of 75, we sent in another recording, did another recording called Mr. Ghost Goes to Town. And this was a sort of a combination of two versions of the songs from the 30s that he played on his show, usually around Halloween. And he played our version. In fact, we still get played around Halloween now and then. So this is pretty cool. So we're like sending in homemade stuff at a time when nobody's doing that yet. Well, a little later on, summer of 1980, I guess, I got an invitation to come down to the show through my brother, who worked with a guy who knew Dr. Demento, and thought, oh, it'd be very cool if you guys want to see him do a show live here in LA. It was on KMET. He did a live show Sunday nights. Now, it was also syndicated. A version of that show went out to stations across the country, and about 2 to 3 weeks after that show was done, elements from that were compiled into another show for syndication. So we went down, and by this time, a lot of people, including Weird Al, were sending in homemade music to the show. The theme of the show had changed a little bit, and it was catering more towards homemade comedy music or novelty music. And so Al was already well known on the show at this time. So my brother and I went down there and got to meet Dr. Demento, of course, for the first time. And the doctor asked if I'd like to come back and do an interview and talk about the stuff I had sent in, now several years before, and whatever stuff I was working on at the time. And I was in a band called Nipper at the time, and we were doing all the LA clubs, Club 88, Madame Wong's, and stuff like that.
Right, all the places, yeah.
Right. So came down September 14th, 1980, and Al was there. And Al and a lot of the other cast members, Musical Mike and Sulu and Jovial Joan, were there answering phones and just kind of providing all sorts of weirdness. Sometimes Al would play something live on the air, but he was there to answer phones. They'd get him to read a PSA now and then. I mean, he was one of the cast
having
characters.
Fun and yeah.
Exactly. But was also a requested artist on the show. Anyway, so I was there doing the interview, and Al was going to debut a song he had just written that weekend live on the air, called Another One Rides the Bus, which is Queen's Another One Bites the Dust. Now, again, Al plays accordion, and there's usually noisemakers and people clapping and people whooping and hollering and singing in the background. So Al had he actually asked another buddy of his, Beefalo Bill, if he would pound on Al's accordion case and provide a beat. And Bill was kind of hesitant to do that. And I got roped into it somehow. I don't know if Al asked me or if Bill asked me or whatever. And I said, yeah, I'll do it. That's fine. That's cool. So we played the song, and Demento recorded it. Now, he usually did an air check on a cassette of the entire show just so he'd have a record of the show. But this time he rolled like just quarter-inch like stereo tape on it. Just for whatever reason, he recorded it on a separate machine, which turned out to be a good move because that became a single. That's what ended up on the first album later on. Anyway, so we finished the thing, and I said to Al, folklore, the rumor is, I said, you should have a band. I'll be your drummer, which sounds like something I would say. Don't know what made me think that. I mean, I didn't envision 40 plus years of success, and it's just something I said. It just seemed like fun. I had a day job at the time. I was already playing in another band, so my drumming needs were basically fulfilled. And so Al and I swapped phone numbers. Anyway, he was in school at the time up in San Luis Obispo, kind of Central California-ish. And he called me a couple of weeks later, about 3 weeks later. He says, that Another One Rides the Bus thing we did ended up on the syndicated show that played this last Sunday night. And in a lot of the markets where they had, and the show usually aired on a Sunday night in all the different markets.
He had a huge following.
Oh, yeah. And it aired on like almost 200 stations across the country. And Al says, a lot of these morning zoo DJs will listen to the Demento show and find funny stuff to play in their morning show. He says there's a bunch of markets are playing Another One Rides the Bus in drive time now. Which is pretty, people are in their cars locked in.
That's the money. Yeah, right there.
That's where you get known. I mean, that's where you get heard. So So he says, I got myself a man. He was right on it. He said, I got a manager. I'm going to be home in January. I want to record a couple of things and put this out and put out a single and put it in some stores and, and kind of go from there. I said, okay, I'm there. So he came back in January. We recorded our first of 3 versions over the years of Happy Birthday. Another one, Rides the Bus, ended up on there. He had a couple of more things that he already had in the can. And we put out a 4-song EP that was commonly known as the Placebo EP because he had it on the Placebo label, generic label. And they pressed up 1,000 of those. And he and Dr. Demento came over to my house after they got all the stuff together. They had the records and sleeves. They had made an outer sleeve that was a lengthy, it was probably 7x14. You fold it in half, so it's 7x7. And you put the single in there, then you put the whole thing in a plastic sleeve, and then they're ready to go to the store. So we sat around my kitchen table in my apartment in Glendale and loaded these things up. And this fits in later, I always carried a camera. And I'm taking pictures of them, and here's Demento holding up a record, and here's Al folding sleeves, and instead of me working, they're working, right? Anyway, that was kind of the beginning of it. There wasn't a band really. The guys that played on Happy Birthday, and it was a rockin' song. My brother played on that. He played guitar on that, and the brother of one of Al's writing partners, a guy named Vince Sanchez, his brother Frank Sanchez was a bass player. So Frank came. We recorded this in my brother's garage. I hesitate to even call it a studio. It was a garage room, and Al brought his 4-track Porta-Studio cassette 4-track recorder in and set up some mics, and we just recorded it there. And that was it. And that's how that first thing was done. And in fact, we recorded several more, and I guess they would be called demos because some of the things got re-recorded for the first album. Happy Birthday got re-recorded, for example. But we did some more things in my brother's garage with my brother on them. And I should add that my brother's pretty well-known guitar player in LA and now in Nashville for almost 40 years, and had worked for many, 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 many years with Neil Diamond, for many, many, many years with Mark Knopfler, and has done an impressive list of studio things. The fact that he came and played on this Al thing in his own place for free was pretty nice of him.
That's such a, that's the thing, like that LA, and especially in those years, the home creation vibe, the whole Fostex 8 tracks, the Porta-Studio, all that stuff allowed a lot of guys to create music and actually sounding pretty decent, right?
Yeah, if it was mic'd well and mixed well and the gear sounded good, and meaning you didn't really have to EQ anything. You didn't really have that option that much because he mixed it right in he wasn't able to run it through a board to another machine. He mixed everything to the tape, and then that was it. And whatever bass and treble you had on the Porta-Studio, that was the EQ. And there wasn't that much to do. So it was raw. There was a lot of energy. Sonically, of course, it didn't match up to the album. But these things all these things we did got fed to the Dr. Demento show, and he played all of them. Again, Al was and is still perhaps the most requested artist on the show. This goes back, 40 plus years.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to me with Al because you guys have outlasted several artists that you've covered.
Oh yeah,
which is a really interesting part of that story. How many decades has this band? I'm sure have you always had the same players, or there's been a little bit of right. So you pretty much had.
Same guys, couldn't find anything better to do for the last 40, 44, 42, 40, 40. Well, the guys, I'm in there since I just happened to play on a recording with Al in 1980. So I go back to September 1980. He and I went through 81, and we had a few different people play some gigs with us and stuff like that, but none of them became permanent band. And we didn't have an album out yet. So I don't want to say, this is all sort of first album, first tour starting point really in his career. If you don't count any of that and you count the album that was recorded in 1982 and all the gigs after that we did, that's been the same band. That's Steve J on bass, a buddy of his, Jim West, on guitar, me on drums, Al on accordion, occasionally piano, simple piano parts, if needed. But I should add that the very first album we did, and there's a story about how that came about, but the very first album we did, Rick Derringer produced it.
Right. I
And
read
he
that. Yeah.
and we didn't. Jim West wasn't quite in the loop yet. Steve and I and Al, I guess, had already rehearsed those songs, and Jim was just sort of wandering in as we were about to get into the studio, and Rick was already up to speed on the songs, both as he was going to be producer, and I think he'd already been invited to play guitar on it. So basically, that first album is me, Steve, Al, and Rick Derringer on guitar, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a pretty good lineup.
and there's a great story about how Rick. See, everything I say, there's like 2 or 3 other things that lead up to it,
yeah.
that all plays into it.
But tell me about Rick.
I got to tell you about how Rick came about. When we recorded one of these demo things, and this was done in the living room of my house when I lived in Whittier, and Al and a bunch of his demented friends came down, brought the suitcase, and we recorded a song he had just written called "I Love Rocky Road" for Joan Jett's "I Love Rock and Roll," which was actually not her song. There was a version of that by a group called the Arrows. Of course, you don't know about that because it wasn't a hit. But she had the hit of that. Al was big into doing hits, and songs about food was important. So Rocky Road and My Bologna and stuff like that.
Yeah, eat it.
Eat it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Girls just want to have lunch. Anyway, Al had realized that in order to do things a little more legally, because one thing had already been turned down, George Harrison had sent a cease and desist when we did Pac-Man for Taxman, and he was not thrilled and sent a C&D. And Al realized, and with his manager, who is still our manager, by the way, Jay Levy, is I think realized that he had better get a little cooperation from the writers so that there's not a surprise after the fact.
Yeah, avoid lawsuits.
Yeah, well, exactly. And that holds true today. He still gets, and there's this question of whether he really needs permission and, to do it. And as long as he pays, the royalty, because he's using their music.
Yeah.
Does he really need?
But it's nice if you have them on board.
and it's important. It's important. So they can't really say anything. If they've agreed to it, they can't really badmouth you for it like Billy Ray Cyrus did. Oh, wait, he did. But he didn't write that song. He didn't write Achy Breaky Heart. So he didn't have anything to do with it. Al got permission from the writer. It turned out Billy Ray was not that thrilled with the song because it was a real poke at Billy Ray and the song.
Wow, yeah.
It was. But it's like, first off, it had already been released, so he was a little late. But it wasn't his song, so it didn't matter.
Well,
anyway,
and honestly, I think at the point where you guys have already done like the Michael Jackson stuff and all that, I mean, it's an honor.
You would imagine. You would imagine.
You would
so,
think.
So in basically in getting permission to broadcast this song, Al had to go to a writer of the original "I Love Rock and Roll." It was a guy named Jake Hooker. Now, among other things, Jake was married to Liza Minnelli. But Jake was also Rick Derringer's manager somehow. So anyway, so in getting permission for that, Jake said, "Oh, this is pretty funny. I'm sort of familiar with the things you've done. Maybe we can get some spec time and go into the studio, do this for real. And of course, my client Rick Derringer will produce you."
Oh, wow.
And it's like, and Al's like, okay, and that's exactly what happened. We got some spec time at Cherokee Studios here in LA, with Rick at the production helm and on guitar, me, Steve, and Al on the rest of the instruments, and we recorded. And again, this is without a contract. This is just to get a bunch of stuff in the can. So we recorded a bunch of stuff. Another One Rides the Bus was already done, even though it sounded nothing like the Queen version. It was a completely different vibe. And in fact, that first album, the trademark of Al, like copying the production as good as possible and the sound of the original songs that he parodied as well as possible, hadn't really kicked in at that point. Now we played the songs and, but these were all, that first album was very accordion based.
Right. It was homegrown vibe, but that made it really fun.
Well,
actually.
that made it unique. But with the second album, and this may have been Rick's suggestion, if not Al realizing that it might be even cooler if we could go after the original sound of the songs and really, so when you hear an intro to a song on the radio, you don't really know whose it is until the vocal comes in. And so with the second album, Eat It, the Brady Bunch for the Safety Dance, things like that, we really concentrated on capturing the vibe of the original recording. And we were okay at that back in 1983 for that second album. We got much better. We got really good. We got to where you could not tell our version from the other version literally until the vocals came in. That's the only way you'd know. And we're very proud of that. We all got into sound design, so we were chasing the production of hit artists. So we had to sort of keep up. And while we were a year or two or five behind the curve, we all learned to do stuff. We all learned to make those sounds.
And at that point too, you guys are all over MTV, and the production quality, everything's just gone way up, right?
Well, it was, and which made it even more important, and I can't overstate how important MTV was to us and to a lot of artists in the days when they were playing videos, and it's not that videos didn't exist per se, you just didn't have anywhere you could watch them yet. And until MTV. So they were still, when our first video came out in 83, they were still very fresh and new and played Al. The Ricky parody of Tony Basil's Mickey was the first video we did. That got a lot of airplay. The next one was I Love Rocky Road. Got a lot of airplay on that. Basically every video, because we were doing things that nobody else was doing. Nobody else was doing fun videos, yet.
Exactly. Yeah, everybody's trying to be serious. And
or artsy or whatever it was.
Right.
And Al was, besides the taking a good poke at some of these songs, and just having a good time, did some really funny videos. So MTV was very, very crucial. But getting back to how Rick Derringer was involved, that's how Rick came into our lives. Now, by the gigs we started doing after that first album, Jim West was on guitar. Rick was signed on as producer for the first 6 albums. This was, I guess, a lengthy I didn't tell you how we got a contract. We recorded the album in 1982, I think March, April, maybe of 1982. And by the end of 82, Al's manager, and I think probably Jake and probably Rick, helped try to shop it around to all the labels, and all the labels said, "Oh, this is great stuff. Someone's going to make $1 million, just not us."
Yeah, they don't know what to do with it,
right? Because they did. It's like comedy. This is not This is not a stand-up comedian. It's not Don Rickles. What is this? Funny music, making fun of other music. Who's going to buy that? Well, Scotti Brothers Records and Tony and Ben Scotti were promotion guys who worked with some of the labels. They took Al on December of 82. Signed Al, and began to put out a plan to put out this album. They said, well, there wasn't really a lead single yet. I mean, nothing was really very current. They said, there's nothing current to grab anyone. Can you put together another parody, or two or something that's more current, so when we put it out, it's relevant. And that's when Ricky came about. And first album came out, I think it was May of 83. Sold all right, charted okay. Next album was, and we did a little short tour with Dr. Demento. This was not a Weird Al tour. It was Dr. Demento doing his show in front of an audience in theaters and stuff like that, and showing videos, film on film in the day, and playing stuff that he had to bleep on the radio, playing it, in front of the audience, and the kids are like,
he had such a loyal audience. I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
They ate that up.
and we were the live performance part of the show. Of course, Al is well known on the show, and we're promoting the first album. So we went out with Dr. Demento. It was a northeastern tour. I think we went as far south as Washington, D.C. We went up to Toronto. I think we played Cleveland. We did New York City, so we did about a 3-week tour, and it went pretty well. Go back in the studio, start recording stuff. I think in the fall of '83 for the new album. We had already begun performing Eat It, sort of a truncated version of Eat It, in this kind of food medley that we do, where we had thrown together a bunch of Al's songs about food and just made a medley out of it, because we didn't have that much space in Dr. Demento's show to do 10 complete food songs.
Do everything, yeah.
So we put them together into about a 10, 11 minute medley. So Eat It was already kind of in his mind. We got permission to do that, recorded that. I think we recorded that in February of 84. No, recorded it maybe in December of 83. Album came out in February of 84. Plan a new tour, again, kind of backing up Dr. Demento, going out as part of his live show. And in the meantime, we did, I think it was about a 4-week tour from February into March. And during that time, when the album was released, now Eat It is like going up the charts. And now gradually this becomes, Dr. Demento show with Weird Al on the side. Now it's like starting to become. So we go back out in the summer of '84, and now it's just Al. And now we got a bus as opposed to we were driving a camper around. And then first tour, we drove a station wagon and had a U-Haul for our gear. And so by summer of '84, second album, we're on our own. We have a little bit of a crew put together at this point. And it's just the four of us, Steve, Jim, me, and Al. And playing this stuff as best we can. But the production on the records wasn't that complicated. It was not such that we couldn't pull it off as a four-piece, or if we didn't, it's like, well, they sound like a funny bar band or whatever. We weren't.
You make it work.
Well, yeah, we couldn't. We probably didn't have, or certainly couldn't afford the technology that we got later that allowed us to sound a lot better on stage, that allowed us to sync up with Al's video of a song while we're playing it live, stuff like that. It wasn't available to us. So things progressed after that. With each new album, there was another tour. Each album sounded better. Each album, I think, tended to chart higher. Well, to a point, anyway. So In 3D was the album that came out with Eat It. 1985, we had Dare to Be Stupid, which had Girls Just Want to Have Lunch, was maybe the single off of that. I don't remember the single, but Dare to Be Stupid, which was an original, a Devo sounded like, was also released as a single. Why can't I think of the single from Dare to Be Stupid? It's probably,
there's a lot of songs.
No, this is huge. How can Madonna, Like
Right.
a Surgeon.
Right.
Which again, huge video to go.
And a great video too.
Yeah, gets played all over MTV. And in the meantime, MTV is bringing in Al to host these 2 and 4 hour blocks called Al TV, where Al plays a bunch of wacky stuff, but also plays legitimate videos, and he's doctored them. He's changed the voice on them. He'll talk over it. He'll point out stupid stuff. He'll have himself, moving in and doing stuff, with the artist and then moving back out. And just 4 hours of just zany whatever. So and these were, big ratings things for MTV too. I mean, they loved Al, and Al loved them. And it just kind of went from there until 1986, Polka Party. The single was Living with a Hernia for James Brown's Living in America. James was on Scotty Brothers at the time, so very easy to get permission on that and massage that into place. And good video, I thought. Good song, funny song, but it wasn't Like a Surgeon. It wasn't Michael Jackson, it was. So the fourth album, not so great. Didn't do so well. It's still, almost 40 years later, has not gone gold. That's one of the 2 albums that has not even sold 500,000 copies. I mean, that's a cool thing, but it's really cool knowing that all of the other albums did. And that's one of the albums,
right?
so we knew it wasn't a hit album then. The fans told us that basically, and it still has not risen. It just hasn't gotten there. It's weird. It's very strange.
Yet you guys have kept touring and kept recording and kept doing it. That's the thing. It's so interesting about him is that all of you is just a longevity factor. It's really amazing. Like you said, the same manager, the same band.
Yep.
And that's obviously you guys are I would assume like a family at this point.
Yeah.
They're yeah.
Oh, very, very much so. And part of the reason that there's 2 factors. I mean, one is Al maintaining his popularity, and part of that is that he's always doing something current. In other words, the song or the context of the song is always current. Like for example, we did American Pie. We did a song called Saga Begins, which American Pie was hopelessly old at that point, but Saga Begins had to do with that year's Star Wars movies that had just come out, and that was what made it current,
right.
For example.
Yoda, the tie-in. Yeah.
Right. Yoda, a parody of Kinks' Lola from 1970-71, came out in 79 or something like that, or maybe 80. And again, not a current song, but a current theme. So Al has stayed current. He's put himself into all sorts of other arenas besides just being a humorous songwriter, singer, artist. He's done voiceover stuff. He's done acting things. He's directed videos. He's written some books. He's got a lot of irons in the fire, and he's really good at all of them. He's very, very good. So that's one. It's great that he's maintained his popularity because that's kept all of us going too. I mean, our careers depend on his career. Now, the way we've stayed together, I mean, I joke when I say we have nothing better to do, but honestly, I can't think of anything better to do than to work with him. And all of these other bands I've been in, regardless of what level of accomplishment that they've achieved, or fame, or whatever it is, none of them have. I would not give up the Al thing for any of them. And I never did, and I never would. I mean, it would take someone bigger than Al to take me away from Al. And at this point in my life, I mean, I'm in Medicare age. We all are. Well,
exactly.
It's the Medicare band.
If you're lucky, you get there.
yeah. It's well, I guess we're all lucky because we all got there. Al's going to get there this year. He'll get his Medicare card, and he'll go, "Oh, I'm old."
Wow.
Then we start calling him Old Al Yankovic. Anyway, but we all have other projects we do. But when Al calls, we get together and we do it, and it's because we enjoy it. And of course, he pays us, but I mean we enjoy it more than anything. We really enjoy it. We enjoy working with each other. We enjoy working with Al. He's very respectful. He's very even-tempered. Everyone in the organization, crew, everybody is great. If someone's not great, we pay them less until they leave, or they're asked to leave. No. Everyone's been great, and it's a very being on the road for some people can be grueling. I mean, it can be grueling for kids, let alone people in their 60s and even 70s to go out. And we were on the road for 6 months in 2022 in a row, and no breaks. 27 weeks actually, 6 months in a week.
It must be interesting for you. I mean, obviously you've had all the hits and the albums, but it must be interesting for you now on this side of things is to be still working that much. That must be so. I mean, plus you're doing it with people that you love. That you have to sometimes you kind of pinch yourself and say, "Wow, how did this all happen?"
It's one of those. It's a stroke of luck. You can't have possibly planned for something like this. You can't engineer it. Like I said, when I met him and I said, "I'll be your drummer. Here's my phone number," I didn't know what that meant. I thought, just have some fun. This is fun. It's all fun. That's it. And it turned into something that stayed fun and became profitable. Everyone's done very well with this. I mean, Al, of course, we've all done very, very well working for Al, and which I'm very happy about, and and very thankful for, and very grateful. And not everybody, it's not something I could have planned, or there's not a career path that you do this and this and this, and you wind up at the top. Otherwise, everyone would do it. It's not that simple. It doesn't work that way in the arts.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is putting yourself in the right place to have opportunities, and then when they present themselves, reaching out and saying, "Hey, I'm here," and that's a really key thing. And I think on that kind of line of thinking, what's some of your advice? I mean, you've learned many things over the years, I'm sure, but what's some of your biggest advice you could relate to other musicians or people that want to be artists? What's some of the most important things that you've actually learned along the way?
Well, right place, right time. It's all about right place and right time, but you don't know when that is or where that is. You don't know. So you have to be a little bit proactive. Networking, I cannot overstate how important networking is. And it doesn't mean giving out your phone number or email address to everybody you meet, but it does mean becoming known. In this business especially, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. So you got to make sure people know you and have your information and know what you do. And that doesn't mean sit back and wait for the phone to ring, but to a certain extent, that's kind of what happens. But you have to get out there. You have to network. Social media and a web presence is extremely important. I mean, I've been online since 1993.
Yeah, and that's another big part of your story as well, being building websites and but anyway, so go ahead and continue.
and that's very important. And it's not really. It's not enough to just have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram accounts and stuff like that, and TikTok. That's not complete because you're subject to their platforms. It's also important to have a dedicated website where you can control the content, where there aren't any ads, that's got a different vibe, where people can't come in and hack or crash or put bad comments on your site. You got to have a place where there's good information. Wikipedia is not completely reliable. I mean, Wikipedia is great if they list a website for whoever they're talking about. And then you go to the website, then you learn about the person. You don't learn about them from Wikipedia. There's so much. I've had to go in and correct. I've got a Wikipedia page that I did not create, and I have to go in and correct it all the time. As people always they think they're doing me a favor and they put in all sorts of information. It's like, this is not right. This is, and they say, who are you to, I said, I'm this guy. This did not happen. This is not correct.
I was there.
So somebody else did this. I'm not trying to put stuff in here that's incorrect. I want it to be correct. I really do. That's why I'm fixing it. Anyway, but having a presence out there on the internet is extremely important. And that's part of networking as well. Having examples of your playing, having photographs. If you've got videos of yourself playing, that's great. Write a compelling bio. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to put your information out there, and through other networking means, you have people stumble across it. Like I stumble on those words. There's ways, and this is, again, I know how to do this because I learned coding in 1995. I can make a page that will come up in the top results of Google. And I remember when there was no Google, there was Yahoo, there were all these other search engines, and I knew, and they were each a little bit different, but I knew how to deal with them. But now it's all Google, and you have to be able to have your page come up in different results. I've got my page. If you go to Google and you type in my name, both names incorrectly spelled, and just put drums, I guarantee you I'm in the top 1 or 2 results, because I put those misspellings in there. Schwartz with a Z, John with an H, Johnny with an H, Johnny without an H, Johnny with one N.
Yeah, and that's so smart to do that, right?
It's a lot of people don't think about it. So basically, I'm very easy. It's like, I heard about this guy Bermuda Schwartz or John Schwartz or whatever he goes by. We'll just type it in, and John Schwartz, yeah, Jon Schwartz, yeah, Shortz, right? And I'll come up. I'm at the top. And so there's things like, so it's important to do it right. It's not just, I'll put up a page with some pictures and people will somehow find it. You have to make it findable, and it can be done. It's very easy to do.
Yeah, that's part of the business, because the thing is, people like, there's a lot of really talented people that we all know, but they just never got to that other level because maybe the business thing wasn't together, or they didn't know how to go out and meet people and give their number and just do the basic stuff. But that's something with me growing up in LA, and I'm sure you experienced is that you learn that really quickly if you want to work in LA.
Yeah. Well, but you know what? Not everybody gets discovered.
Right. I mean, that's true.
It's just not. Now, one thing that's also happening again, and this is where YouTube has become very important. People that can play their butts off will, whether it's technically or whether they're just great groovers, they can put that stuff on YouTube for free. And if you could just drive people to see it somehow, and again, this is important. It's who knows you. It's how do you get people to come find out about you. But you can put examples of that stuff up there, and people will know immediately. And some guys overplay, and it's like, God bless them. That way, I can work forever because these guys play the way they do.
That's exactly the way I think.
I am so glad. I'm very happy for these guys, and they're incredible technicians. And it's like they're never, ever, ever going to get my gig. And they probably aren't smart enough to know that they would want my gig because their mind is somewhere else. And there's room for players like that. I mean,
it's all good. Yeah.
But not that many, and not in the mainstream, and not in Al's band, and not in any of the bands. I was never, ever, ever thrown out of a band. I was never thrown out of a band, but I was never asked to rise to a certain technical level. I was always where I needed to be. I never had to go beyond, because that's not what what 99% of the bands do.
Yeah, and I'm actually right there with you, because I always think, and I it's fun to watch. I mean, there's so many great players, technical players, and that kind of thing. But I've always, I did like Frankie Avalon and Gary Puckett, and that's meat and potatoes bass. But yeah. I like playing bass. I like playing that, and I can do the solo stuff. But I've never been hired where they asked me if I could solo. That was never a thing. So which is fine. It's all good. So speaking of websites, what is actually your website? How can people find you?
It's BermudaSchwartz.com, SCHWARTZ, or BermudaSchwartz.net, or BermudaSchwartz.org, anyway, I nabbed all of those long ago. Yeah. And that's got, it's basically got all of my information. It's got my email. It's got photos of me. It's got a resume, a list of all the credits. It's got links to articles and podcasts. This will be on there. And it's got links to all of the companies that I endorse. who I'm involved with, some other it's all about me, which is what it's supposed to be. And that's where you find that. And it's not interactive. It's you go there and you read about me, and it's, you click on this and, you go to another site or whatever it is, but you find out about me there. Now, for interactivity, for a dynamic with the people I know and other musicians, that's what I use Facebook for. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. I rarely use them. My Facebook handle is Bermuda Schwartz. And I think it's literally facebook.com/Bermuda Schwartz would get you there.
Yeah, and that's how we actually met. And I just basically we've messaged a few times over the years, and it's such a great story. I'm happy for you and the band, and I know how rare that is, and I've always enjoyed what you guys do. So it's such a pleasure to kind of hear the story fleshed out, because like you said, there's a lot of little rumors here and there about how this happened, how that happened. So it's fun to get the real story from the guy that was there.
I should add that now I believe there is only one other band that has been together longer than we have with its original members, and they're still active.
Right.
And that's U2.
Ah, okay. Awesome.
That's it. ZZ Top, sadly, has gone by the wayside.
Yeah.
Rush and Neil Peart wasn't the original drummer, but even if you say he was, they are no more. They fell off the list. I don't remember if there were any others.
I don't think so.
It's U2 and us, and U2's got us beat by a few years, and as they should. It's
a rare story, man. So, it's awesome to talk with you and get a chance to learn some really great information. Everybody, please check out Bermuda on his website, all the other places. As you said, he's easy to find. And the other thing I should mention is you're actually Weird Al's archivist, which is also great.
A hoarder, archivist, whatever.
That's important, though, right?
Well, it became important for a lot of reasons, but I'd always just been that way. It's not like I suddenly realized, this Weird Al is going to be big, and I better start grabbing stuff because someday I'm going to, take it to the thrift store or something. I had always documented and kept and recorded and done everything all the way back to about 1970, 71. I still have reel-to-reel tapes of musicians I played with rehearsing in my living room at home. And I still have those. I mean, now they've been digitized, but I kept all of that stuff, flyers for bands I played in, photos. I always took photos. I had a dark room at home when I was a teenager. Always took photos. And the archiving aspect with Al just that was just an extension of it. There just was more cool things to archive with him, like cassettes and LPs and CDs and videos and, books and posters and costumes and merchandise that we sold on tour. And there's just a whole bunch of stuff that's cool to file away and basically give back to Al one of these days. But the archiving has come in handy. Some years ago, the label wanted to put out a video compilation, and Al wanted to put together some notes about the videos, little information about the videos, like the dates we recorded them. I said, you and your manager directed them, don't you know? No, you've got that all in one place, don't you? I said, yeah, I do. Okay, well, we recorded this video on these 2 days at this place, and this was the director. We had a couple of directors before Jay became the director, and then Al became the director. And I had all of that information for them. I had all of the information when Al said, how many live performances have we done as a band in the album, the touring years, and so we've done 1900 and 72. He says, so we're not at 2000 yet. I said, no, not yet. He says, okay, just checking. I don't know what that means. I don't know if he's going to try and stop at 2000. But we had some fans try and celebrate our 1000th show. And is that 1000 dates that we played? Because sometimes we do 2 different shows on a day. And sometimes, it's important to know, there's a difference between a show and a show day. And they also didn't know exactly when to start. And they may not have had a complete list, although I keep a complete list on the website. So Al relied on me for that. And it turns out it wasn't quite where the fans thought it was. That wasn't quite 1,000 shows. I didn't have the heart to tell him. But I said, Al, you got all these notes, congratulations on your 1,000th show. I said, no. Not quite, not really. Actually, I think we had already achieved 1,000. We had already passed that landmark.
Yeah, but at this point, it probably feels like 1 million.
It does, but that's okay. I've enjoyed every one of them. And then the rest of the archiving, and when I say photographs, I ended up putting out 2 photo books of Al. And the first book was actually a bunch of photos nobody had seen. It was a black and white book called Black and White and Weird All Over. And this came out in 2020. And of course, I ran everything by Al, and not like, well, he hadn't seen most of these photos, so I had to run them by Al. These were all, none of them had been printed. They were just all on contact sheets in a file cabinet. So I ran all of those by Al. If there was another guy in the band in the photo, or if Al's manager was in the photo, because I would take shoot photos on the video sets. And sometimes, other people would be in there. I'd run them by him. Is this okay? I want to see about getting this published. Yeah, it's, all good. And that book did very, very, very well. We did a box set with some special extra stuff and, photos, frameable. Anyway, book did very, very well. Put out a second book, came out in late 2022, called Lights, Action. No. Second book in 2022 called Lights, Camera, Accordion. I wish I could tell you I came up with the names for either of these books, but I didn't. Anyway, these were all color, and a lot of these photos had been seen, but they were on the web. And back in the day, in the 90s and the 2000s, because of screen resolution and bandwidth and all that, they were small. Some of these photos were 320 by 240. I mean, they're this big. Which on a 640 by 480 screen, that filled up 25% of the screen. That was pretty cool. But they were ridiculously small photos. Anyway, several of those got reprinted. These are all from the negatives now, and got reprinted on nice big pages, nice and clear. The old photos were taken from prints, so they weren't really full frame. So now you're seeing, color corrected, density corrected, crystal clear photos in a great all-color book spanning 25 years. And that book has done pretty well. Second, sequels don't always do as well as the first book. So the second book is sold about half as well as the first, which is great. That's good for me.
Well, I'm sure it means a lot to the fans to have that material. I'm a Getty photographer as well. That's one of my 10 jobs. So I'm the same guy. I'm there taking photos of rehearsals and all that. And people, they don't think about that. I'm like, no, you got to get that stuff is important. It's good to have, Well,
it's interesting. I mean, I did that at a time. Well, first off, Al, I just always had a camera with me. I didn't happen to have one with me that first night I met Al. Not that I wasn't carrying a camera, I just didn't bring one that day. But the next time I saw him and we got together to record Happy Birthday, I had my camera there. And almost every other time we were together, all the time on tour, in the studio, on video sets, and nobody thought to tell me, and I wasn't always in the videos full time. So I'm standing around a lot with a lot of time behind the scenes, shooting pictures, and you can see the crew and the camera and the person with the clapboard and stuff. And I've got all of that stuff in there because I'm available to shoot it. And Al and his manager he's always has a camera. That's just what he does, and then anybody there from the crew, it's like, well, he's Al's guy. I guess he's okay. So nobody ever questioned me, and I'm just shooting away. I'm getting in people's faces, and just as long as I'm not in the way of the camera, I'm just clicking away. And that was the bulk of the first book, were a bunch of shots from videos that nobody had ever seen. They've seen the videos, they had just not ever seen these pictures. Certainly not the behind the scenes stuff. I mean, they're all behind the scenes, really.
Yeah, well, that's sort of having like the VIP access to the that's super exciting. I'm sure the fans just absolutely love that.
Well, they did, and I love that they love that, and Al loved the books too. I mean, really, that's very cool for him to have them in his possession because now he's got like nice copies of those. Now I sent him all of the files. I mean, he certainly has got high res files of everything, but it's very cool for him to have a book, on his coffee table, and people come over and they look at it and it's a book and it's him. And it's, which is, but that's okay. I mean, it's him. I'd like to have a book about me. That'd be
right.
Cool.
Yeah. We should all have a book about ourselves. Hey, Bermuda, thank you so much for your time. I super appreciate it.
You're welcome, Daryl. Thank you.
We will put all your information on the podcast posting with your website, all the social addresses and all that. And you guys I'm sure you're always doing shows. You're in the studio recording. So if everybody wants to check out your calendar, you always have it on your website, correct?
Well, the way to find out what Al's doing specifically is to go to his website.
Okay.
And that's weirdal.com.
Right.
And I was smart 30 plus years ago, whatever it was. I got WEIRD, of course, and I got WIERDAL.com. So no matter how badly you spell it, if you don't get the E before I thing of weird, You'll still get there. He will always have upcoming schedules, upcoming news, things like that. We're not touring this year, 2024, but we should be on the road in 2025. Where I think we're going to have some new things to play. I think Al wants to put something new out this year, and WeirdAl.com is probably the best place to get that. If you want to know just about me, it's BermudaSchwartz.com. If you want to know about what gigs and stuff I've got coming up, I sometimes put those things on Facebook. And again, it's Facebook.com/BermudaSchwartz. And again, easy to find. Or, email. People can message or email me. I mean, it's not, my access has been out there for many, 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 many years. Unlike a lot of other, I guess, celebrity drummers that you can't get a hold of. I've just always been online. I've always been accessible. And that's, and I'm part of the Al fan community as one of them, because I've just always, been there to talk to, because they can't always get a hold of Al directly, of course. And I'm just, and I love the fans. I mean, if it weren't for the fans, none of us would be doing this.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Thank you so much. Awesome. Have a great day. Hopefully I'll get a chance to see you guys live when you get out on the road.
Hopefully next year.
Yeah. Awesome. Have a great day, Bermuda.
Thanks, Daryl.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us, and please consider subscribing to our podcast and follow us on our social media pages for guest announcements.